Welcome to this session presented by Galileo. I'm Laura Thiesel, and I'll be your moderator. Now, today's payment fraud landscape is a growing threat, with fraudulent card transactions projected to hit 43.7 billion by 2027. Card not present fraud surged 35% in 2023. That was costing businesses $3.75 for every dollar lost. Beyond direct losses, fraud drives up cost. Businesses spend 23% of operational expenses on prevention and recovery. Now, stronger fraud defenses are essential, but customer experience matters just as much. 67% of consumers abandon transactions due to complex authentication, while 92% expect both security and convenience. Balancing security and usability is the challenge. So, to discuss what you can do to strengthen your fraud defenses while delivering seamless customer experiences, I'm joined by Max Spivakovsky, Head of Global Payments Risk Management at Galileo, and Greg Fisher, VP of Strategic Account Success at DataVisor. So welcome, Max and Greg. And let's start by getting each of you to briefly introduce yourselves to the audience. So Greg, let's start with you.
Thank you, Laura Beth. As mentioned, my name is Greg Fisher. I'm with DataVisor now. Have an extensive background in fraud prevention, detection, investigation, recovery, basically all aspects of the fraud food chain, from cards to deposit products. And I'm happy to be here participating with Max.
Glad to have you. And Max?
Hi, Laura Beth. Great to be here. Max Spivakovsky, Head of Risk Payments within Galileo, with my background in payments risk, fraud risk management, and financial crimes. My responsibility is primarily to address and protect our clients on the Galileo side. Great to be here with you and Greg.
Well, thank you both. And now let's get into our discussion. First question here, how do you dynamically adjust authentication friction based on real-time risk signals while maintaining, a smooth customer experience? Max?
That's $1 million question. The reason for that is the customer friction is always a big pain point, as within the fraud, we are always trying to balance between the experience while at the same time mitigating and detecting fraud. One of the known and the best approaches right now available in the market is whatever we like to call a risk-based authentication, RBA. It's a dynamic approach. It basically allows us dynamically to adjust certain levels of authentication based on the risk signal as we are getting them from our multiple channels of payments, multiple vendors. It allows us also to balance the security, the customer friction, and as I mentioned before, the experience. One of the critical components in this entire risk-based authentication profiling is evaluating the risk signal. It is basically authenticating the attempts and the system while evaluating the signals and the patterns that we are getting from our capabilities, our tools, our models, such as locations, devices, attributes, network details, and so on. At the same time, as we're thinking about the friction and the experience, we also must be able to adjust our authentication requirements. The level of friction for every single user has to be tailored. It has to be in real time, and we must be able to employ and deploy stringent authentications while at the same time lower the risks of takeovers, as an example, or increasing the implications of smoother access for our customers.
Thanks, Max. I agree with everything that you said. I believe that the risk-based strategy is completely appropriate. And you think about the consumers who are bound to a specific device, and then if you see that device coming in repeatedly over and over again, and then you can assess the risk of the transaction itself or the application itself, and if it's the same PII or if it's the same transaction pattern, then that consumer would fall down more of an easy path because they have established themselves with those particular credentials. But when things get out of pattern or there's an anomaly, that's when there's some friction, some step up authentication potentially, and further investigation into the consumer or the transaction itself to ensure that it's appropriate.
Yeah, great thoughts there. And, Greg, what role does AI, ML play in reducing false positives in your fraud detection system? And how do you measure its impact on customer satisfaction here?
Yeah, I think that kind of takes what Max's answer was and takes it just one step deeper. Foundationally, artificial intelligence and machine learning will use or will reduce false positive rates, just because of their capabilities, their ability to look at a larger volume of transactions or a larger volume of variables and make the appropriate decision based on the risk-based strategy that Max mentioned previously. Um, you can look at advanced pattern recognition in both supervised machine learning models and unsupervised machine learning models. For example, the ACH network processed over 1.2 billion transactions in 2024. The ability to identify the risk points for 0.1% of those transactions gets increasingly difficult with the greater volume. And so you need machine learning to be able to hone in on the risk signals. Anomaly detection is another capability that machine learning brings into the equation. Behavioral analysis of the consumers, to the point about that Max mentioned about authenticating or logging in for a transaction or for an application in the first place. And ultimately, what both of those do is increase the precision levels that the models bring to the equation. And therefore, when there's a greater precision on the fraud variable, there's fewer goods inside of that pool. So there's less impact on all those consumers.
I believe it's also important to add to this the fact that the latest evolution of AI and ML allowed us to be much more proactive in our real-time analysis, real-time pattern recognition. So
Mhm.
taking into consideration, as Greg mentioned, the ACHs, as we know them, not necessarily happening in real time, but in real time, we are able to make decisions preventing us from losing from having any financial losses, financial implications. So this is the immediate evolution of the AI or the AI capability. But at the same time, shifting a little bit towards the ML, the ability of ML to continuously learn from the data, keep improving itself, the accuracy, and adapt to the new fraud factors, while at the same time taking the facts of the real-time analysis. It what makes this entire ML reduction of the false positive very robust methodology that is now being applicable across financial industry.
Thanks, Max. That was actually a point that I had meant to bring up, the adaptive learning, so that the unseen attack vectors are layered into the capabilities of the machine learning platform. So you're exactly right.
Yeah, great thoughts there. And, how do you adjust fraud controls for different payment vectors while ensuring, consistent security across, pay to play transfers and digital wallets?
I think this goes back to a little bit back to the first question, to adopt a risk-based strategy. So each payment vector has a different risk point, whether it be ACH or a digital wallet or a credit card. Similarly with applications, whether the channel that they're coming in from, um, and each one of those strategies, ACH might lend itself a little bit more towards an account takeover risk point. So in order to solve for account takeover, you're looking at things like PII changes or device takeover information. Um, all of these, you're ultimately looking for transaction anomalies, and those are, you can have a couple of different approaches to that with the risk-based strategy. One, the way I like to think of it is that there's always going to be some level of your quote unquote insurance rules. So things that are high dollar, high velocity, or completely out of pattern activity. And then there's the more active rules and active strategies that apply specifically to the behavior of a consumer, whether or not they are fitting a pattern that they have normally set out for themselves. So that's all, the transaction rules or the rule monitoring engine can be layered on top of the machine learning and AI capabilities that we've already talked about a little bit.
Just to add to this a little bit, the fraud controls in general are so spread across the financial institutions that one of the things we also should be considering, and let's call it the octopus effect, is when certain triggers on specific instances, specific use cases will help us to be much more proactive and dynamic when with adjusting controls in completely opposite realms. The operational impact and its implications on how we are addressing the ACH concerns, the transactional fraud or transactional controls, transactional models, and how they're drive the decisions that the operational team can potentially have as part of the uh, conversations with our end users and customers. So the overall umbrella of the triggers across the financial organization will also help us to make those controls much more robust.
Yeah, and Max, beyond just standard fraud rates, what metrics do you use to evaluate, both security effectiveness and customer experience impact?
There's always so many KPIs in the industry that we would like to measure. Obviously, the first one that come to mind is the fraud capture rate, or whatever is industry known as the recall, the fraud hit rate as the precision. Um, those are the bread and butter of the financial organizations measuring the success of the fraud controls, fraud models, efficacy of the rules, and so on. At the same time, I think it's very important to overlay another layer top of this one with what are our false positive rates, false negative rates. Just so everyone can also understand, in the false negative, the lower our rate, the better our security for our customers. The detection time for any of those fraudulent activities, specifically on the real-time transactions, as we're getting more into the digital space, and the near real-time transactions, as ACH, as Greg mentioned before. Um, the feedback and the incident response rate, as we're measuring the overall success, it's also one of those metrics that I think are very, very critical for the overall success of all the programs.
I think a couple other things that that can be helpful to layer in is looking at fraud activity and all of those measures that you just mentioned, Max, by vintages to see if there's different behavioral patterns based on a specific year or 2 year stretch of applications that were onboarded, or if the behavior and the behavior of that population as it changes over time, based on different risk factors that can include job security and things of that nature. And then from an operations perspective, I've always thought that it's important for those managers of operations shops that are looking at case management systems to manage the total number of alerts that they get. I think that that's something that's often kind of forgotten about, and fraud practitioners like to play, inspector to a certain extent, so they want to try out a rule or two here or there, and then they forget to remove it, and it's generating cases, and it just makes for more noise. So it's important to keep the overall alert volume at a manageable level.
Yeah, and Greg, how do you leverage that real-time transaction data and feedback loops to continuously improve fraud detection accuracy while minimizing legitimate customer friction?
The feedback process is something that is, I think, overlooked often in the fraud solution process. Connecting the fraud tags or the bad tags, and bad being however you define it, whether it's a return or a chargeback, having a clear distinction between bad behavior and good behavior fed back into the real time transaction data as quickly as possible is extremely beneficial to the overall health of a fraud program. The benefits are the machine learning models are going to be able to adjust to the new tags and see what the profile is of maybe a new attack vector. Detection strategies with rules utilizing artificial intelligence can be strengthened whether it's fine tuning a rule dollar amount or a device type or whatever the variable is that is new based on the feedback that's been provided, will help in the precision and the recall of those rules. Link analysis, establishing that connective tissue between fraud tagged transactions or applications in a case management system, will show connections to other activity that had not yet been detected, so that you can tie it back and perhaps uncover a ring that has caused some losses in the past or that were yet undetected. And all of that, back to a similar point, will reduce the amount of good customer friction. I think that one of the things that I like to consider is, friction in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but it's bad when it's applied to the wrong people. So this will reduce friction on the good customers by being able to focus on the bad activity.
No, Greg, you're absolutely right. Friction plays a big role right now as we structure the systems. I just want to add that having a continuous feedback loop, as you also mentioned before, becomes very critical and strategic in creating new tools, new capabilities as we are assessing the real-time transactions, as we are assessing our client customer success.
Yeah, and Max, when integrating with third-party apps, how do you implement risk-based controls that protect the ecosystem without degrading the partner experience there?
It's another $1 million question, I would say. Implementing seamless customer, seamless partner experience, it involves a balanced approach where we have to prioritize the security without causing the necessary friction. There are several things we can potentially consider: dynamic authentication, as we mentioned before, the risk-based authentication per individual or per entity that we would like to profile, the real-time monitoring. It is very critical also to assess the partner feedback as part of our, as we discussed before, the closed loop, partner feedback, customer feedback, as well as the collaboration, both internal and external, should be assessed as part of the overall success. Um, Risk-based controls, again, it's very nuanced right now. Education is very important. Educating our customers, educating even internally how we potentially can reduce any friction to enhance our experience.
I think one thing to add to that is to be, when you're evaluating third-party apps or capabilities that are outside of your typical your organization's wheelhouse, my suggestion would be to be more patient with it. Knee-jerk reactions often lead to mistakes. Do your due diligence, look deep into what this new third-party app is going to solve for you, before you jump in and try to solve something that may not necessarily need the attention that you think it does in that moment.
Yeah, and real quickly before the end of our time, a question for you, Max. What role does AI play in helping you distinguish between genuine customer behavior changes and potential account takeover attempts?
AI definitely helps us with being very proactive with our anomaly detection, enhancing our ability to address the behavior analysis of our customers, improving the multi-factor authentication for our customers. It should be very tailored and triggered based on our needs as well as the customer experience.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Greg and Max, for a great session, and thanks to the audience for joining us. If you want to learn more about Galileo and the services they offer, be sure to stop by their virtual booth found under the Exhibitors tab at the top of the page. We hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you.
Thank you all.